Hi, everyone. Welcome to the third episode of Career Backstage podcast. My name is Diana Moraru, and I'm the co-CEO of Awarely. So today we'll be talking about how to tailor your CV, and we have our guest speaker, who is Elissa Turrini. And Elissa, she's the CEO of Stellar CV, and also has over 20 years experience in human resources. Welcome, Elissa. How are you today?
I'm well. How are you?
Good, thank you. Just finished the Leading Globally course at Exec MBA. Really long day from morning. Okay, so before we actually touch a little bit more on how to tailor your CV, I would like Elissa to ask and share with us, who is Elissa Turrini?
Okay, so my name, I'll tell you a little bit about myself and how I started. I did actually originally start my my studies and my career in hospitality and tourism, and through that I did actually manage to. I was working in a hotel, and I got the chance to work in a human resources office, and I realised that that was really where my interest and passion was, and so from then on, I then changed up my career plans and did some additional further study in human resources, and the rest is history on that point. So I've had a lot of experience working in different government departments, local government. I've travelled a lot. I've worked in UK, I've worked in Australia, and also more recently in the UAE as well, and Saudi Arabia as well. My life changes, I guess, have happened in the last few years. I settled down, I had children, and I had to try and find something to do where I was able to work in a job to start where I could work from home and manage my children at the same time. So I started my own business, knowing that my passion was definitely in the areas of recruitment and specifically helping people. And in my sort of when I really dug deep, I thought something I could really do is helping people with CVs, because I have seen a lot of CVs, hundreds and thousands of CVs over my time, and I've seen a lot of amazing CVs and a lot of not so amazing CVs, I guess. So I thought that's certainly something I can do, which I can work in my own business and be able to work from home, but also be able to help people as well. So that's where we're at today.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing. And now, to be honest, it's a really good opportunity for people to reinvent themselves. So with this pandemic situation, obviously, a lot of people started to reinvent. So what is a digital CV? Because a lot of companies starting to using a digital CV where, for example, you don't have to write a CV and send via email, but it's more digitally. So they schedule like a Zoom call, and you have to present yourself. That is a digital CV. And what is the difference between the digital CV and a CV that we build ourselves and we send via email? There is a difference between these two.
Yes. So digital CVs, I guess, can be explained in a number of different ways. So the most obvious type of digital CV is what a lot of people will have anyway, which is their LinkedIn profile. So basically anyone can go online and have a look at someone's profile in an already established pro forma, which is the LinkedIn standard, where you've got your profile details, you can put your photo up, education history, work history, all of those kind of things. And people can actually look at it from the back end as well. So recruiters looking for staff can use that platform to find people. It's a massive database of millions and millions of people on across the world. The other types of digital CVs are particularly people use them more in the creative industries. So someone who might be design or working in IT, anything that's really in that kind of area where it's almost a little bit expected that if you were going to have a CV that was for a position that was in that creative field, then you should be coming across and showing your skills in that area. So being able to use different types of information and creativity, which people can bring up online. That's also a way that people do it. The other thing is that people are starting to do video CVs of themselves. So they might have their own CV up on YouTube or another video platform where they can sell themselves by actually talking. Again, digital CVs, as much as they are definitely a modern way of doing things, it's again going to really depend on the employer and the types of industry that you're applying for. So perhaps someone who's, like I said, in a creative industry, it's a great idea. Someone who's maybe applying for something a little bit more formal along the lines of, finance, legal jobs, those kind of things, they're probably still looking at the more traditional type of CV. But there's really many, many different types of things that you can do, whether it's digital or whether it's, a regular standard CV on paper that is sent off to someone. Either way, it's just going to depend on who the person is receiving it.
And there is, for example, a difference between, let's say, a standard CV and also a video CV, because it's a different way of interaction with a CV, with a video CV. So, what are the differences?
Well, I guess with a written CV, it's obviously you need to look at the way that you've the content that you're putting in it and the type of information and saying, writing the correct words for what you're trying to sell. If you are using a video CV about yourself, again, it tends to be for jobs that are more along the lines of creative, in the creative industries, or a job that's definitely more of an extrovert type thing. And what they tend to do is it really is for people who are willing to, speak loudly about themselves and want to talk about themselves and can sell themselves. The idea of doing that for a lot of people is awful, and which is completely understandable as well, because it does tend to put you on the spot a bit. But again, it's definitely another way of doing things, and for employers, it really is a great opportunity for employer to see someone in the beginning and saying, they've got the exactly what we need. We like their personality. We like the way they speak. We like the way they come across, and they're going to fit really well in our organisation, or not. But probably most people will have, had a bit of practice doing it. So they do tend to sell themselves in the best way. Again, all depends on industry and the company that's hiring. And it is tending to go more that way. Like I said, there's still the traditional methods of applying a regular CV, but digital and video are certainly up and coming trends.
And what is the structure, for example, of a customized CV? If you can share with us an example.
Sure. So when you're writing a CV, CVs can be written in many different ways, but I definitely think that writing a CV, traditionally, the information that a recruiter is going to want to see is, of course, personal details in the first thing. So your name, your phone number, your email address or contact details, however they're going to get in touch with you. It could even be a link to a LinkedIn profile, but it has to be that name and phone number or email address, or both, or whatever however they can get in touch with you. Once you've done that, then people tend to have a personal profile. So it's really just a small summary, a couple of sentences about you, whether it's going to be your, usually sort of talk about how many years experience you've got, just the key things that you are. So whether you might be mentioning that you're a qualified software engineer and that you've got 15 years experience in, with a leading company like Microsoft or whoever, and that your expertise is in certain things. It could be focusing on softer skills. So, you're considered to be empathetic and have, or you're a diligent, hardworking person, these kind of things. Just a little bit of a blurb so people can get a small understanding of you. When it comes to the next parts of the CV, I always think that it's really important for people to highlight their key skills and attributes. So these can be hard and soft skills. So it might be SEO optimization, it could be critical thinking, it could be organizational planning, any of these key things that you believe. So the top 6 to 12 things about yourself that you think are really key things. And the reason that you highlight these in the front is because recruiters only really have about the first 10 seconds to be scanning someone's CV, and they need to be able to find these things that people would describe themselves most frequently, and the things that would really stand to them. So particularly if you're looking at a job description and you say, these are the key things that we're looking for in someone, as someone who's applying for that job, you want to make sure that information is in your CV in the front so people can see it. I always suggest that people then tend to have a section where they consider their career achievements. So another thing that really is a focus for CVs now is to look at people's achievements and what they've done. Obviously, in a sales role or business development, having key figures like, increase sales by such and such percent, or manage to go above targets by 50%. Those are typical sales type of things, but not everyone is in those types of roles. So you need to look at other types of achievements that you've had, whether you've won an award, whether you were managed to create efficiencies in the workplace, or managed to reduce cost and time through other methods. No matter what area, whatever job you're in, by being able to list those achievements, you've gone above and beyond the call of duty and been able to think outside the square to better help the company, and future employers like to see that.
And can these achievements, for example, to be included in the job responsibilities, or should be completely separate kind of heading in the CV?
Both, but I think to have some of these achievements just highlighted in the first section is that first shot. Again, when someone's looking at a CV, they only have a few seconds or minutes in that. When you're scanning 300-400 CVs, and you've really only got a couple of seconds to look at each CV, by immediately being able to see those achievements, the key achievements, this is definitely something that I say put in the front first, along with those key skills. You can follow that then with your employment history, your education, any other information, whether you're a member of specific board organisations, or whether you've done particular technology skills, or really the lesser important information can go towards the end. But you can certainly add additional skills, additional achievements in your employment section, but really highlight those key ones at the beginning to make them impact.
Thank you for sharing. But I saw in so many CVs, for example, in the personal information, they put the full address. Is correct to put in your CV the full address? Like the number of the apartment or house, number of the street?
No. So what is important, that in the days when people used to send out formal letters such as an acceptance letter or a rejection letter, you would have someone's address because that's how everything was done in mail, in regular standard post. Now everything is done systematically through either a website or just by email. So you don't need to add all your personal details. Generally, I just recommend to add the city that you're living in, and then your phone number and so forth. It could be that, and people do put a lot of personal information in, but again, from a security perspective, you really only want to be putting the city that you're in, and that also helps employers know whether you are local or not, so that if you're applying for the job, particularly when it comes to things like visa requirements and so forth, it might be that they need to know that you are living in the city where you're from, so that you don't have any restrictions with actually getting to work or so forth. So a city address is fine.
Yeah. Is there, for example, any specific language that we need to use in customized CVs?
Okay, so depending again on where you're applying to, if whatever the job advertisement is listed in, that's what you will apply to. So if the job's written in English, you would apply for the job in English. If the job's written in German, then you would apply for the job in German. Whatever the job is advertised in, that's the language that you should apply in.
And what about the keywords that we need to use? There are specific keywords that we need to use in the customized CVs, like if we apply for different I don't know, for different jobs in different fields?
Yeah, so the biggest thing that I say is that to make sure whenever you apply for a job, you need to tailor your CV specifically to that job. So if you have a strong history of career history in sales, but you're applying for an administration like office manager job, you really need to tailor that CV to focus on the administration side of things. So even though you might have been working in business development and sales, along in that job, there's a lot of administration that's also tends to be done in those types of roles as well. So that's the kind of things that you want to be highlighting in your duties and responsibilities that you've had in the past, and really focusing on the job and saying, okay, the job mentions strategic management 3 times, or it mentions planning an organisation. So you need to make sure, you need to look at the keywords that are listed and make sure that's listed in your CV. So it not only helps because a recruiter will pick up those words with their own eyes, but when you're also going through some of the sophisticated applicant tracking systems, things like tailor and all of those different tracking systems, they are going to pick up on these keywords, which is going to rank you in their system much higher than someone who doesn't have those words. So it's really important to really look at the job description and try and match a lot of the information to your CV and cover letter as well.
Yeah, and especially when, for example, the CV is analyzed by a software, it should match at least 90%, I would say. And also it's really great because in the job description, when we analyze, we see that a lot of verbs are action verbs. So we're going to be really great. And it's really important for people who tailor their CV to have that action verbs in their CV. And also, I would like to share with people who are watching us about the personal profile or personal statement, or just profile, how we title after the personal details. So that couple of lines that you mentioned, I see that couple of lines as a summary of the CV, where exactly you said we put the number of years experience, we put some interpersonal or soft skills, and also we have to mention what kind of job we're looking for. So employers, they know exactly that we're looking for this particular role in this specific field, which is really great. So you was writing so many CVs. So what actually is missing most of time from a customized CV when you analyze, or what people obviously not pay attention to, but it's really important to be there?
What I find a lot of the time with CVs is that people are generally just documenting the duties that they do rather than focusing on achievements. And that can really make CV sound more like a job description than actually trying to sell themselves. So again, a CV resume is something that you are really trying to use to yourself, and people do find it difficult. If you're not confident in writing about yourself, or if you're, sometimes people have been in jobs for 15, 20 years and they've never really had to have a CV because they've always managed to get a job through networking. People they know might have suggested to them, to meet someone else, and that's how they've got a job. So when it comes to actually writing a CV and feeling confident about yourself, it can be really difficult. But being able to look at things that you've done in the past and really focus on that, and but have it in a way that you've achieved, writing in an achievement type of writing, rather than jotting down, wrote letters and did typing and whatever, but really focusing on more achievement type of things. These are definitely ways to really sell yourself in your CV, and that's what I see a lot of people lacking. I also find that people tend to use a lot of space that they don't need to. CV is really important to have white space because you do need to have, just even using through margins, correct margins and things like that, because it is much easier for recruiters to read. But having more than 2, maximum 3 pages, depending on the career someone has, but people will be filling it with information like reference contact details and personal contact details. Again, all of that, I live at this street number and this apartment and whatever, and just wasting space, putting in large photos, this sort of information and stuff that at the end of the day, recruiters just don't need to see at that first point. So
yeah, That is a really good thing that you mentioned about the photo. And I noticed that so many CVs have a photo, but a photo can be a bias. So it's really recommended, for example, to have a photo in our CV or not?
I recommend always to have a photo on your LinkedIn. If someone wants to see what you look like, they can go to LinkedIn. And the LinkedIn profile photo doesn't need to be a professional photo, but it needs to be a positive photo. So I do find people on their CVs and on LinkedIn will sometimes put a passport photo, which is never an attractive photo and not really selling yourself. But if you do have a photo, just make sure that it's a smiling photo. You can have a photo on your CV. I personally don't recommend it. I know that some employers in certain areas will always think that it's important. I personally don't, but it's really down to personal preference. If you are going to put a photo on, then you need to make sure it's a photo where, you know, you're smiling, you're looking engaged, and you're looking like someone who would want to be employed by a company. But
And
personally, I necessary.
And you mentioned earlier about the structure of customized CV, and I noticed that especially students when they finish university, because they don't really have experience, most of time after personal data, they put, for example, some of them they have professional profile or personal statement, and after that they don't put the skills and experience, the skills and expertise, but they go straight to education. So it's a good thing, for example, to mention straight away the education, even they don't have any experience, or is something if they have at least 6 months experience, so they can put the experience and after that the education. How is
likely if you're a student, you're only going to with a student CV, a recent graduate CV, they tend to only be one page anyway, because students and graduates don't have a lot of information to put in. They may have been lucky enough to get some experience either as an intern or working, part-time as in the field that they're interested in. So someone who's maybe doing finance and accounting degree and have managed to work at a local accounting after school or while they're studying or whatever. That's really an advantage to have that information. But the key thing for students and graduates is going to be their education. So I always would be putting education first, followed by experience. Unless if it was someone who's maybe had a lot more work experience that they could tally up and say, well, this is really important experience that I've had on top of my degree. And then that shows that they do have specific experience. But you do tend to find students tend to have work experience that's more like bar work or restaurant work or part-time work in something that's unrelated to the field that they're studying. If they're lucky, they might have that field, but it's not that common. So usually the education is the most important thing for students.
And we know that employers, they look, for example, do not have in a CV the gaps in employment. And some people, obviously, they take a career break of 1 year or 6 months. They go on leave of absence. So how we can mask these gaps in employment? If you can share with us an example, that would be great. We're going to help people who are watching us, how they actually can mask this gap in employment in the CV.
So an example, some of the things I will find when I meet people is that they'll say, oh, this position, I was only in it for 6 months. And then you probe further and you'll say, oh, well, that was a contract role. You're only employed on a contract basis, and there are always going to be situations. I don't know a single person who hasn't left a job because they just didn't like it or it didn't work out for whatever reason. And it's completely okay to be honest with someone. If you were finding that you were leaving jobs continually because you had a clash with management, or if you, you just didn't like the job, so you left, that's going to be a problem for you, and you need to learn how to explain that. And that will be questioned by employers or recruiters when they're looking for jobs. But if you have a career break where you might have gone overseas for 6 months travel, you might have had a career break because you were looking after family, you might have had a career break due to illness, you don't always need to list it in your CV, but I think sometimes genuine, I would say that unless it was continually stopping and starting jobs, if it was just breaks for whatever reason, employers they're not going to say, well, they didn't work for 2 years there, so we're not going to call them in for interview. They'll probably ask in interview, but I don't think you need to explain every little section of why you didn't. But I would suggest that if you had smaller jobs for less time, put in brackets, contract role, temporary employment. Because if you're in a job for 3 months and then in another job for 3 months and then in another job for 3 months, but they're all through a temporary agency because you were only able to focus on getting temporary work at that time, especially during a pandemic where securing full-time jobs is hard work, it's perfectly fine to say that it was a contract. You are more than able to put in a section that says, between this year and this year, I had family commitments or 6 months travel overseas, because at the end of the day, that is all relevant to people's lives. And that's what people do. People aren't in the same jobs for 20 years with no breaks. And, it's a very different mindset to how things were a number of years ago.
Yeah, and if we look, for example, back at the structure of CV, I saw that some CVs are under 2 or 3 columns. So it's good, for example, to use and to structure CVs into 3 columns, just to fit to 1 page or whatever, 2 pages, or it's good just to have 1 column because it's more clean and it's more easy to read.
Okay, from the perspective where you are applying for a job that's going to go through an applicant tracking system and specific software, using things like columns and tables are pretty much something that we suggest people don't do, because there's a chance that information might not get picked up. And that's just the reality of using applicant tracking systems. So if I ever do a CV, the CV is going to be something that is fairly plain and consistent, as long as the key information, you can use certain colors and do things like certain information using bold. You want to be very careful with fonts. People don't want to see anything too crazy, but using, something that's easy for people to read, that's fine. But I tend not to use columns, again, unless you're looking at using a creative CV where it's going to go directly to someone, not through a system, and you can certainly use columns and pictures and different things to make it look more impressive. But I always recommend, really, if it's going to be going through a system, and you can usually tell, usually if you're applying for a position online directly to a company website, it's going to be going through an applicant tracking system. If you're just sending it to someone's email address, that's a little bit different, and that's not probably going to go through a system. But, I always suggest plainer for the most impact, to make sure that your CV gets as much information through as possible. Just leave it as clean and simple as possible.
Yeah, and if we want to apply for the same job but in different countries, and we build and we tailor our CV and is a customized one, can we use the same CV even if we apply in different countries, or we need to change it, or we need to adapt?
Every job that you apply for, you adapt the CV to that job. So, for example, if you were applying for a job in Dubai and you were living in Dubai and your place of residence was Dubai, but you wanted to apply for a job in France, then I would really be focusing on, you'd need to say in that CV that you have plans to relocate, and that you have connections with France, or whatever the situation is, or that you've had a long interest in always moving to France, particularly if you can speak French. That is going to be a huge advantage. You really need to focus on why you're going to go there. The last thing for any job, whether you're applying to a different country or whether you're applying to a different organisation, you really need to make sure that CV is hitting the target of what they're looking for, and not just having a generic CV to cover all jobs that you apply for. So you might be, even though you might be, say, for example, a project manager who's got supply chain management as well as PMP, those types of things. If you're applying for a supply chain job, even though you've got project management experience, you want to apply for, continue to focus on those supply chain skills and attributes that you have. But if the job's really focusing more on projects, then you want to put that project information in. So I always say that if you're a job seeker and you're applying for jobs and that is your main focus, you really need to treat it as treat looking for a job as a job in itself. You know, getting together a spreadsheet or a list or something to say who the companies who are applying for, find out who the person is that's in charge of looking after the job. Can you get their contact details? Can you get in touch with them directly to say, you know, I'm interested in this job. Is there anything I can find, anything I can do, or I should put into my application? Where shall I send my CV? It might be just a situation where they say just apply online, like the same as everyone else. But if you can get as much information as you can about the job and the person that you're applying to and really targeting your CV to that job, you've got a much higher chance of getting a response.
And now, okay, so we build the CV from our point of view, it looks perfect. How this customized CV is analyzed by employer? What are the things that actually stand out and should stand out for an employer when they look at the CV?
Again, it's going to be looking at those keywords. So really making sure that particularly in the first couple of, in that first half of the first page is having those keywords and that key information. So if it's a project manager job, you really want to have the word project manager written in there somewhere for them to find it. You need to have any information that the job is, say the job's based in a certain city. If you've got some tie to that city, then you can put that city in. So they can say, oh, yes, they've had experience in this. I mean, particularly if it's an overseas job and they say, well, or we have a lot of ties with the US, and someone says, well, I've been working a lot of the time with the US because my job involved liaising with our head office in New York, you know, those type of things. So just any kind of key thing that will someone can pick up in your CV to just see that there is recognition. That's really important to have as much familiarity as possible.
And because we talk about customized CV, it's really interesting to see if there is a role of personality and values in CV, how we can bring, for example, our personality and values to wrap up in the CV.
Okay, so again, these are soft skills. And again, writing your CV is all about really using your personality. And it is something that I find important when I am talking to people. A CV, sometimes you can go to CV writers and they'll say, yes, send me your details. I'll rewrite your CV and send it back to you. But unless you're actually speaking to someone and learning about them, it's hard to get to know what their personality is. And you can't write about someone if you don't really have an understanding of their, you know, mannerisms and interests, and people tell you a lot when you're talking to them. So, you know, you can find out if someone is trying to be, tends to have more of an empathetic feel, or if they're very driven, and asking people that kind of information as well. So, using those verb words and that type of thing to really put towards your CV. So again, when you're introducing yourself, you might say, I'm an ambitious and driven, you know, legal director with whatever, or, you know, a tenacious product development person, or whatever the situation is, by using those verbs to really describe the person that you are, and even using them in your key skills area. So saying, I have, one of my key skills is, you know, staff management, because you're really able to connect with staff and deal with staff problems, you know, and things along those lines. Whereas if you're someone that's not really great at that, you might want to focus on other things, that you are, you know, meticulous about attention to detail and those types of things. Like, these are all key things. And again, you want to highlight what's in, and you want to look at that in the job description too. If you're not a driven person, but you're going for a highly competitive sales job, maybe that job isn't right for you, because you don't want to have to go for a job and then find out that that's not really the type of person that you are. You need a job that's going to fit your personality as well.
Yeah, exactly. And because you touch on LinkedIn profile, so I wanted to ask you about if it's really good to have on LinkedIn recommendations from other people that we used to work so far, or if we've been a student, if we can have, for example, recommendations from our colleagues that we used to work on a specific projects. if this is a really good thing, and also if someone else is endorsing for skills on LinkedIn.
It's extremely important. And again, LinkedIn's one of these things that people tend to use. If a lot of people will use LinkedIn as a networking tool, and they use it all the time. People use it all the time to talk about different things that they've done throughout their career, whether they've done a new course or whether they've been promoted, and they update their things. Other people use LinkedIn only when they're looking for a job and really don't update anything. They might have the title of their current job. They might not even have a LinkedIn profile. It's really important when you are in the job market to have a LinkedIn profile and to keep it updated. Anything that you can add to your LinkedIn profile, whether it's maximizing the number of skills that you've got, which LinkedIn will let you add 50, whether it's contacting a colleague and saying, would you mind speaking on behalf of me, talking about that project that we worked on, whether it's a previous manager, whether someone might just endorse, would you mind endorsing me for a few skills, some project management or training and development or anything along those lines. Always reach out to people. And again, this is where things like reference checks become a little bit obsolete in the actual CV, because people, again, contact details tend to be more confidential at this point. I would never put a referee in on a CV, because you know who's going to be in touch with them. You're giving out free details, and really it's only information that's needed as requested. But for an employer to go onto someone's LinkedIn profile and see a recommendation and say, oh, look, their boss said that they were amazing to work with and that they were, it was a loss when they left the company or whatever, then that's a huge compliment that's already written there for free about that person. And the more of those you can get, the better.
And I noticed that in some CVs, people using different colors for the headings and also for writing their name. It's a good thing to have different colors in your CV rather than black and white, or?
I always say that definitely don't have to have colors. If you do have colors, really keep it to a maximum of 2 colors. So you might say that, your writing's in black, but you might have a blue or a red title or something like that. Or you might just use your headers in certain things. Again, the industry is really going to determine what you should and shouldn't do. So I probably wouldn't have apply for a job as a lawyer and have, hot pink writing and so forth. You really want to make it as professional as possible. But again, looking at something, a more creative job, then that becomes more relevant to have, a little bit of color. And it does tend to show your personality a little bit as well. But you do tend to stick with the straight colors rather than anything too loud.
Yeah, because why I'm asking you this question, because some employers, for example, especially from recruitment department, if they have, for example, disc profile or organ profile, right? Once they look on the CV and is, for example, the name of the person is in red color, they might think, okay, this is actually the dominant person. So, and looking at our dynamic in the team, we really need, for example, a compliant person, which is more sticking to blue color. So that's why I think that sometimes it's really good just to keep it black because this type of colors, they are not interpreted. So, which is really brilliant. And just to summarize everything what we discussed, can you just share with us some tips and techniques how to write a customized CV which highlight our skills and also our values and expertise?
Okay. So one of the things I always say is not to write. There was a trend a little while ago of writing in the third person. So you might say, Diana is a confident, challenge-driven individual. Diana does this, Diana does that, and that's not really how we would write CVs anymore. That's something that sort of went out. It was a phase for a while. Writing either in first person or writing, say, for example, rather than even mentioning I or your name or whatever, you would just say a confident person. Really just focusing again on those action words. So anything to say that what you're doing to show confidence about yourself, really trying to sell yourself in your CV. I know again, it's something that some people find difficult, but really being able to talk about yourself and say, remember that you're someone up against a lot of other people, and you need to try and work out how you're going to stand out from the crowd. So saying, talking about yourself in a confident manner is really important. Making sure that your CV has a lot of white space. Really try not to go over that 2-page limit if you can. If you are going to do it, you do want to fill in the whole page. You don't want to say, he's 2 pages and a quarter. You'd really want to maximize it out. Try not to have too large font or too short, too small font. It needs to be readable. Really, you need to look at it as from a recruiter's perspective and find what's the way that's going to catch their attention. So using those attention words, and also, again, not writing in paragraphs so much, but when you're listing the things that you've done, your achievements or your duties, using dot points, that's key. So it's much easier for people to read rather than a whole bunch of paragraphs and sentences in one thing. And again, just really driving home the information of the key things that you've done in each role, and being clear about things like dates and locations and things like that. It's if, for example, you said, I worked at such and such from 2011 to 2012, was that January 2011 to December 2012? So was that a 2-year job or a 2-month job? Trying to be clear. And the easiest way that a recruiter can understand a CV without having to ask 100 questions is really the best way. And always double check everything that you've done. So making sure that you're using spelling and grammar checks. Have someone else read your CV for you so that they can have a look at it and say, I don't think this quite sounds right. It's always helpful to get a second perspective on things or a third perspective on things. And really just testing the market and making sure that the job is always tailored to the job that you're applying for. No one wants a generic CV that say, well, are you looking for this job or this job or this job? It's hard to tell because you haven't really focused. So, you've put in information about this and this and this, but it's not really clear what you're looking for. So being specific there as well.
And let's say we have like 20 years experience, or maybe 15 or 10 years experience. So how far we can go back to state our experience in the CV?
In terms of going back, sometimes I would generally say 10 to 15 years is what you would be looking at. But oftentimes, for example, some of the things that you might have done 20 or 25 years ago might be really relevant to the job that you're applying for now. So again, it's that type of thing where you're going to tailor your CV to the type of the job that you're applying for. So if you've got some critical things that you used to do back in the, although it's completely irrelevant for most jobs, but it is relevant for specific jobs because, say, for example, you were you were working in the military, for example, and you're applying for a job where there is military a need or liaising with military, or it's quite a there is some link there, then you do want to be able to put that information in, and by at least mentioning it somewhere, saying prior to this time I had a career in the military doing this and this and this, then that's sort of also important as well. It might be, but in the general rule would be more like 10 to 15 years.
Yeah, thank you so much, Elissa, for sharing all the insights with us. It's really wonderful, and thank you so much for having you at the third episode of the Career Backstage. I really enjoy, and hopefully people who watch us, obviously they took some kind of tips and tricks how they can tailor and build a customized CV. So thank you so much for all of you who've been with us. I'm waiting for you for next episode, the fourth one of Career Backstage, which will be on 15th of February with Helen Banner, and we'll be talking about how to reinvent ourselves in our career. Thank you. Have a great day, and I'll see you soon.
Okay. Bye.